In this video, we're going to take a look at 3 accessory organs of the digestive system, which will include the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So let's take a look at the liver first. You can see it in this picture here in red. It is the largest gland in the human body, weighing about 3 pounds, and you can see it sits directly underneath the diaphragm. So it has a lot of different functions, but one of the functions is the production of bile, and bile is going to be useful in the digestive tract, specifically because it's going to help with the digestion of lipids or fats that we consume. Now you'll notice that there are 4 lobes that make up the liver. You have a right lobe, you can see here, a left lobe here, which are separated by this falciform ligament. This ligament is also going to help hold the liver in place and attach it to the abdominal wall. On the posterior side, you also see the caudate ligament and the quadrate ligament down here below. Now, in between the caudate and the quadrate lobes, we have an artery and a vein, so a hepatic portal vein here in blue, and then a hepatic artery here in red. We'll also see the bile duct, which is coming from the gallbladder, which will be carrying bile, to the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. So all of those structures are going to be found kind of wedged in between this caudate lobe and quadrate lobe here. Now looking at the microscopic anatomy of the liver, you can see that it's divided up into these structures called lobules. So we have these hepatic lobules, like this large guy here. There's another lobule out here. And in the center of each lobule, we have a central vein here. And you can see radiating out from that central vein, we have hepatic sinusoids, which are wedged in between all of these cells of the liver called hepatocytes. Now, the hepatocytes are going to serve a few different functions, but one of the functions is they're going to help break down glycogen into glucose and then release it into the bloodstream whenever we are in between meals. So if we haven't eaten a lot in that day and we start to have low blood glucose levels, these hepatocytes actually store glycogen, just a stored form of glucose, and they can break that glycogen down and release it into the bloodstream to allow us to increase our blood glucose levels if necessary. These cells of the liver also produce bile, which I mentioned before, that is stored in the gallbladder. That bile is used to help digest lipids or fats that we ingest. We also know that hepatocytes help remove nutrients from the blood and either use or store them. They also degrade old hormones, toxins that might be present in the blood, bile pigments present in the blood, and drugs or medications that might be present. So these cells are going to help detoxify the blood as well. So all of the blood that gets filtered from the digestive organs, so from like the stomach and intestines, for instance, not only will that blood be full of nutrients, but it may also contain some old hormones or toxins or waste materials that we do not want to retain in the bloodstream. And so the liver is there to help filter those materials out. We know these liver cells also secrete albumin, which is a protein that we talked about back in the blood chapter. They secrete lipoproteins, certain clotting factors for the blood, and angiotensinogen, which we talked about back in the endocrine chapter. And we talked about how it helps regulate blood pressure. So it's going to play a big role in the blood as well. So the liver is going to have a variety of different functions, but the 2 main ones are going to be, in regards to the digestive system, are going to be to help regulate blood glucose levels by allowing us to release stored glucose from these hepatocytes, and by also producing bile, which again helps us digest fats or lipids in the foods that we eat. So now let's take a look at the pancreas here and the gallbladder. So in this image, you can see kind of the flow of bile. So as bile is produced by the liver, it's collected by these hepatic ducts, and those will merge into form what's called the common hepatic duct, which you can see merges with the cystic duct from the gallbladder. And those 2 together will end up forming the bile duct, which will carry this bile down to the duodenum. But first, emptying that bile into this hepatopancreatic sphincter, or this hepatopancreatic ampulla, rather, which you can see can open and close thanks to the hepatopancreatic sphincter here. So this ampulla, this region here, is what's going to allow not only bile to be secreted into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, but it will also allow the pancreas to secrete its digestive juices into the duodenum as well. Now, we've mentioned that bile is going to be produced by the liver, but it can be stored by the gallbladder. So if we have an excess amount of bile that is made by the liver, that bile can actually back up into the cystic duct and be collected in the gallbladder for later. That way, if we ever have a really fatty meal that we need to digest, we can have some excess bile sitting around in the gallbladder that can be used for that digestion. So what is bile? Bile is a fluid that's going to contain certain types of minerals, cholesterol, phospholipids, as well as bile salts or bile acids. Now those bile salts are the main things that are going to help aid in fat digestion and fat absorption. But if those bile salts become too concentrated in the gallbladder, that can lead to gallstones. So gallstones are collections of these bile salts that have concentrated. They form these little stones, and if they accumulate in the gallbladder, they can end up blocking this cystic duct or this bile duct, and that can lead to some severe pain because the gallbladder will start to contract very forcefully to try to push those gallstones out, and it can cause some really, really severe pain. Also, if those gallstones are severe enough to where the gallbladder ends up rupturing, that could cause some serious problems as well. So gallstones are something that if a person has them over and over and they keep causing problems and keep causing blockages, a lot of times doctors will just recommend to remove the gallbladder altogether to prevent having any more issues with that. So people who have their gallbladder removed typically will have a little bit more trouble digesting very fatty meals, and they are typically told to stay away from really greasy, fatty foods because it can cause them to have an upset stomach because of that. There's also a pigment contained in bile called bilirubin. This is the major pigment in bile, which is typically a yellow to green colored pigment. And so when it's really concentrated, it ends up, switching from a yellow-green color to a very deep green color after it's released from the liver and when it's stored in that gallbladder, which is why typically when you see a diagram of a gallbladder in any textbook, most of the time they color it green because that bile is going to have a deep green coloration to it by the time it is collected in that gallbladder. Now, as far as the pancreas goes, remember the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine function. So the endocrine function of the pancreas is allowed for by those pancreatic islets, which are going to produce insulin and glucagon, the two major hormones that help us regulate our blood sugar. But about 99% of the pancreas is actually made of exocrine cells, which are used to produce and secrete digestive juices that can then be secreted into the duodenum to help aid in the digestive process. So what do these juices contain? Well, some of the pancreatic juice is used to help neutralize the acidic chyme that's coming out of the stomach. So some of this juice coming from the pancreas is a very alkaline solution, which is mostly made of sodium bicarbonate. And again, it's there to be secreted into this duodenum and to help neutralize the chyme that is coming from the stomach to prevent it from damaging the lining of the duodenum. So these secretions are going to come from this pancreatic duct here in the pancreas, and again, the pancreatic duct will empty into this hepatopancreatic ampulla here, which allows that fluid to be released into the duodenum. Now, along with those alkaline juices, within that pancreatic juice, we're also going to see some enzymes, which are used to digest certain food groups for us. For example, trypsin and chymotrypsin, those are enzymes used to help digest proteins. We have pancreatic amylase, which is going to help us digest starch and complex carbohydrates. And then pancreatic lipase is going to help us digest lipids or fats that we have ingested. We can also produce ribonuclease and deoxyribonuclease in these pancreatic juices, which helps us digest RNA and DNA, respectively. Now, there are some hormones that are secreted by the mucosa of the duodenum in response to fat that we might have in the chyme that's coming from the stomach. So, There are a couple of hormones produced by the duodenum. We have cholecystokinin, or CCK, as well as secretin. So cholecystokinin is produced in response to fat that's found in the chyme. Secretin is going to be produced in response to acidity of the chyme, right? That chyme is going to be very acidic that's coming from that stomach because of all that hydrochloric acid that's present. Now, cholecystokinin, its major function is to stimulate enzyme secretion of the pancreas. So those enzymes that I just mentioned help secrete them or stimulate secretion of them from the pancreas. It's also going to stimulate contraction of the gallbladder, which will help us release bile into the duodenum for digestion of those fats or lipids that might be present in the chyme. Now, secretin, on the other hand, remember this one is released in response to the acidity of the chyme, and so this is going to stimulate the liver and pancreas to secrete sodium bicarbonate, that alkaline fluid that's part of this pancreatic juice, to help buffer that stomach acid and neutralize it so that it doesn't damage the lining of that duodenum. So this rise in pH is going to activate some digestive enzymes that are also found in that pancreatic juice, and digestive enzymes that are going to be found in this intestinal mucosa here. So not only is it going to help neutralize the chyme, but it's also going to activate some of those enzymes in the duodenum that are used to digest some, or start the chemical digestion of some of these food groups that we have eaten.